Today's episode of Locked On Grizzlies talks about pigeons and not just the flying vermin. We're also going to discuss the Western and Eastern Conference Finals finally being set. Final four in the NBA are locked and loaded, and Joe Morant flexes his financial muscle once more, still a possible face of the NBA in the future. It's a Monday edition of Locked On Grizzlies. Let's lock in.
You are Locked On Grizzlies, your daily Memphis Grizzlies podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, it is another installment of Locked On Grizzlies, and yes, it is I, Joe Mullinax, back in the proverbial flesh, the digital voice, all the various ways that you can take in Locked On Grizzlies. When I partake in the festivities, I am with you again, Joe Mullinax, hosting today's episode. DeMichael Cole not with me today. We have missed each other the last several episodes. We will reunite, I promise, at some point this week, but we both are dealing with life. You know how life happens every once in a while. DeMichael and I taking turns, making sure that you stay caught up with everything Memphis Grizzlies basketball here on Locked On Grizzlies, and the dynamic duo will ride once more, I promise. It'll be coming later this week. Today's episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use the code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. Make sure you're liking, commenting, rating, reviewing, subscribing wherever you get podcasts. If this is your first time checking out Locked On Grizzlies, hello, how are you? Thank you so much for being with me for the next 30 minutes or so as we talk Grizzlies basketball and the NBA at large. If you're an everydayer, thank you so much for being a subscriber. Subscribe in other spots. Tell your friends, tell your family, make Locked On Grizzlies part of your NBA and Memphis Grizzlies content consumption each and every time that an episode drops. Apple, Google, Spotify, Amazon, YouTube, literally anywhere you get a podcast, you can get Locked On Grizzlies. The NBA finally has their Final Four set. It is the New York Knicks and the Indiana Pacers in the Eastern Conference, and in the Western Conference, it is the Oklahoma City Thunder and the Minnesota Timberwolves. Now, as a child of the 90s, I was born in 1987. Yes, I am old. I am 38. As a child of the 90s and the early 2000s, growing up as a sports lover, I personally am very excited for the rekindling of the New York Knicks and Indiana Pacers rivalry. All of the juice that came with the choking and Reggie Miller, all sorts of different angles you could take historically with this Pacers-Knicks series. And of course, in recent times, as a wrestling fan, if you're an everydayer, you know that I love me some pro wrestling. Jalen Brunson and Tyrese Halliburton did an angle, and I believe it was Madison Square Garden with WWE. LA Knight was involved. It was pretty entertaining, and now we're going to see it in person over the next at least 4 games out east. So a lot of fun things going on in the Eastern Conference, a lot of reasons to be excited about that series. And then out west, of course, after a pretty impressive performance by the Denver Nuggets, they were underdogs going into that series with the Thunder, who the Grizzlies certainly know a lot about. And yet Denver was able to force it out to 7 games, a really impressive outing. Nikola Jokic once again showing SGA might be the MVP of the league, but Jokic is the best player on the planet. Aaron Gordon is a made man in these playoffs. The way that he competed all the way to the end, had a grade 2 hamstring strain and still went out there and rebounded well and did good things for Denver. The team needed him and he was there. So it was impressive to watch the Nuggets fight as hard as they did, but the Thunder were just too much. The best team in the NBA throughout the season continued to flex that proverbial muscle, and now they will take on the Minnesota Timberwolves in the conference finals. Jalen Brunson, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Tyrese Halliburton, Anthony Edwards all make the conference finals before Ja Morant does. We're going to talk about Ja later on in the show. Ja's going to be just fine for a variety of reasons that we'll keep discussing, I'm sure, here on Locked On Grizzlies. But it does sting a little bit, bringing this back to the Memphis side of the equation, to watch teams that have such a bright future. In the case of the Thunder, to a lesser extent in the case of the Pacers. In the case of the Timberwolves, having a young star like Anthony Edwards, the one who is being pointed at as the next face of American basketball, when 2 years ago, or a little more than 2 years ago, that was going to be Ja Morant. And again, events happened in Memphis over the weekend that make me think he's going to be just fine. We'll talk more about that. But Ja is not currently playing basketball. He is not going to be on one of the biggest stages that the NBA has to offer. And I mentioned those names, Brunson and Halliburton and Edwards and Gilgeous-Alexander. 2 of those 4 are going to have the biggest stage of them all in the NBA Finals before Ja Morant does. And I do think that you have to look at how these teams have been built. And you have to acknowledge the strength of parity in the NBA. I will never give Adam Silver credit. Never. If you're an everyday or the Locked On Grizzlies podcast, you are well aware that I think Adam Silver is the worst commissioner in all of professional sports. But as DeMichael Cole, my wonderful partner, has pointed out, if we're going to be unbiased on this podcast, the parity that currently exists in the NBA, if you like the fact that Oklahoma City or Minnesota is going to be one of the 2 teams representing the Western Conference, if you like the idea that of the 4 teams remaining, only the Knicks are one of the true blue bloods of the league remaining, and it's hard to call the Knicks that given all the struggles they've had this century. The Knicks have been there less recently than other teams that would not consider themselves blue bloods. So the freshness of these matchups and the fact that the finals is going to include players that aren't Steph Curry, players that aren't Kevin Durant, players that aren't LeBron James, the fact that that's going to occur, you could throw the Boston Celtics in there too, given their recent domination. That is the parity that has been a priority for Adam Silver. So if you like that, and again, I do like that there's competition. The parity of the NFL is one of the reasons that that league is so successful. The NBA trying to emulate that, and they've had some success. There's no denying it. However, watching how these teams have been built, it helps you realize until there is a change of philosophy from the front office of the Memphis Grizzlies, the Grizzlies are far away from these 4 teams. Not in terms of talent. I do think the Grizzlies have remarkable talent, especially at the top. But they don't have the mindset to go all in like the New York Knicks did. When they went out and they traded for an OG and an Obi. When they went out and traded for a Mikal Bridges in particular. When they brought in Bridges for the amount that they got to pay, or they had to pay, to the Brooklyn Nets. They overpaid more than likely, but Bridges was a dominant defensive force in the Knicks series that just concluded with the Boston Celtics. You could argue he was the most important defender of the conference semifinals. The Knicks don't get to where they are without Mikal Bridges. And Mikal Bridges doesn't get to New York without the package that the Knicks paid. Pascal Siakam, another name that was acquired by the Indiana Pacers from the Toronto Raptors. And the willingness to make those kinds of deals and to do the things that are necessary to bring in talent, that matters immensely. Because if you don't do that, if you don't make those moves, then you are going to struggle in terms of building in a small market. The Knicks obviously are not a small market, but Indiana is. The Indiana Pacers most certainly are a small market team. So you have to be willing to pay the price. And you also have to be willing to go through some lean years. I don't know that the Memphis Grizzlies are quite there yet. But I do think that they are going to have to make a decision. If you want to be in a position to be a team like the Oklahoma City Thunder, and we've liked to think of them in that way in the past, the Grizzlies being a poor man's Thunder. I've said that before. But the Thunder acquired veteran players. Isaiah Hartenstein, Alex Caruso. Those are veteran key components, especially Caruso, being able to defend a player like Nikola Jokic. The way that he did, Jokic had tremendous success, but when Caruso defended him, he was able to frustrate him enough, and the Nuggets didn't have enough behind it, that it helped the Thunder win that series. The Grizzlies don't have anybody like that. You can argue they tried with Marcus Smart, and they swung and they missed. But what I take away from these 2 conference finals pairings, whether it's Gobert going to the Minnesota Timberwolves, the Knicks and the Timberwolves making the trade that they did involving Karl Anthony Towns, and both teams making the conference finals, talk about a win-win, am I right? There was wheeling and dealing and seismic trades. There were lean times for Oklahoma City. And there were signings of veteran players. These are things that Memphis has not interacted with in the last several years. So something, if you want to be like the teams that are currently still playing, 4 of the 30 that remain, if you want to be one of those squads, something has to change in terms of your mentality as a front office. You have to do something with this roster, or you make a choice to go like OKC and accumulate a whole bunch of assets. You go young and you rebuild. I don't think Memphis is there yet. But the other option of making a major move, I do think we're closer to that with this team than we've ever been before. We'll see if Zach Kleiman, the GM of the Grizzlies, is able to pull the trigger and get something done this time around. We know there's been efforts in the past. Let me know what you think on X. Hit me up on YouTube at Joe Mullinax on X. How are you feeling about these 4 conference finalists and where Memphis compares next to them? When we come back here on Locked On Grizzlies, I mentioned it earlier, Ja Morant was all around Memphis as Nike had an EYBL event in the city. The Ja 2's Kool-Aid edition. Remind us all of the star that Ja could be. We're going to talk about that next. Stick around. Today's episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by Monarch Money. Have you ever checked your bank account and wondered, where did all my money go? I do that all the time. Between dining out, online shopping, entertainment, it's easy to lose track. I'm guilty of it. Maybe you are too. That's where Monarch Money comes in. They're your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money is not just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all of your accounts, investments, and spending in one place, so you stop just managing your money and you start building wealth. When I started using it, I realized how much I was spending on eating out for various meals, the food delivery in particular. Now I budget smarter, I save more, and you know who's really happy about it? My wife. Managing money with my partner is smoother than ever, tracking shared and personal accounts, setting goals, and staying on the same page without stressing one another out. More so me stressing her out. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use the code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNBA for half off of your first year. So this past weekend in Memphis, Tennessee, it was the EYBL, I believe it's called. And forgive me, I am not super attuned to the workings of AAU basketball or, youth basketball, travel leagues, that sort of stuff. Not my bag, baby, right? But Nike, Adidas, I am well aware that these major shoe companies, basketball apparel, they have these kinds of tournaments. They have these kinds of events. They are seen and be seen. And in the recruiting realm, when it comes to college basketball, they don't go to high schools, right? It's not like high school football where coaches still show up and talk to high school coaches, spoken from experience. That still happens. That doesn't happen as much at the basketball level. It's more so these tournaments and these events like the EYBL in Memphis, Tennessee. Obviously, Penny Hardaway was there from the Tigers, but you had Kelvin Sampson. Biggest coaches in the country were in Memphis, and the eyes of the basketball world to an extent. Not quite the same as the NBA playoffs, but there was a lot of attention being paid to this activity that was going on in Memphis, Tennessee. And Ja Morant and his Kool-Aid shoes were a major focus as well. The Ja 2s, DeMichael has talked about those. They were on full display, and they were being hyped up throughout the week, whether it was members of the media being in, getting hype versions of the shoe in a Kool-Aid style canister, whether it was Nike online. This is from at Nike store. A shoe designed to give you wall-bursting juice all game long. The Ja 2 and Kool-Aid mixed berry. It went on sale, was very successful, sold out, all that sort of stuff. The design of the shoe, leaning into the Kool-Aid partnership. Nike remains fully invested in Ja Morant in terms of being someone that they are promoting, somebody that they're collaborating with. They are not shying away from the relationship. And I mentioned earlier in the show, the Anthony Edwards future of American basketball thing. And that's still very much a thing, right? SGA, obviously Canadian. Tyrese Halliburton, maybe not in that realm quite as much. Jalen Brunson, obviously being in New York. There's an opening there as the old guard of LeBron and Steph and KD and Kawhi, as they start to age out over the next couple of years. Who's going to be that next guy? And it would feel like Anthony Edwards, given his promotional gigs, given the attention that he gets, I believe it's Adidas that he works through, he is somebody that makes sense as that next guy potentially. And that is certainly, given his success on the court, warranted in terms of this is someone that both wins, because this is, I believe, the second year in a row that the Minnesota Timberwolves have made the Western Conference Finals. The success on the court married with the promotional considerations, all those sorts of things, Edwards has the juice in that way, regardless of off-court issues that we're not going to go down here on Locked On Grizzlies. Ja, of course, has his own off-the-court issues, but those have subsided, at least in the past year or two. And Nike seems satisfied. Nike is putting their promotional might behind Ja in this new shoe. And it's a reminder for us that Ja Morant remains a superstar caliber player. And it's a reminder for us as we go into this offseason, when DeMichael and I are together, and you guys know me, if you're an everydayer, I love the trade machine. I love sitting down and figuring out ways to move on and remake the roster in a variety of ways. And even Ja Morant can be fun to pal around with on the trade machine. But Ja Morant is the most talented basketball player the Memphis Grizzlies have ever had. And if Ja Morant is able to stay on the court, which is a major if, I understand that completely. If Ja can stay on the court, stay healthy, stay focused, he is a top 15 player in the National Basketball Association. He is an all-NBA guy, if not better. Morant had a top 10 selling jersey despite the injury-riddled season that he just endured. Ja remains a major focal point of advertisers like Nike, arguably the most influential basketball brand in the world. So Ja Morant has an opening. It's still there, and it's not quite as pronounced as it once was. Don't get it twisted. Baggage is baggage, and scars are scars. But Ja can still be that guy. He can still be the future of the NBA from an American perspective. Can he catch up to Giannis? Can he catch up to Luka? Can he catch up to Jokic? Fair questions. Can he catch up to SGA? Ja has a lot of growing in his game to do. He has to be more of a threat from the perimeter. He has to be a more consistent defender, not just a stocks opportunistic defender, somebody that can stay in front at the point of attack, that doesn't get picked on alongside a Zach Edey pick and roll. There's too many flaws, too many opportunities and openings there if Morant is not able to continue to grow in that space. But Ja is still 25 years old. He's played a lot of NBA basketball. You can't say he's young in that sense, but you can say that he has room to still develop his game a little bit. He's not quite the finished product yet. Maybe we're a year or two away from saying that as he enters his full prime. But there's growth. And there's opportunity to develop his body and develop his frame still and find space, not just in terms of navigating screens and picks, but also finding space to better acclimate, not just on the court, but off of it. Nike clearly believes in the power of Ja Morant. He's box office. He can go viral in an instant. No NBA player can do what he does in that respect because of his athleticism and because of his connection that he has with younger people in this country. He's not Allen Iverson just yet, but he has that potential. And Nike sees it. And to be honest with you, I still see it. Memphis, of course, sees it. So as we go through the understanding, again, going back to what we were talking about earlier in the show, if you're going to subscribe to this 2 max contract philosophy and building around those deals, if that's how Memphis has to do this moving forward, I don't think Ja Morant's the guy you move on from. I don't. Because he has that spark. He has that it factor. And he can play basketball at a very high level. I will never let anyone forget what Memphis was doing in Game 3 to the Oklahoma City Thunder with Ja Morant on the court before his injury. The Grizzlies were taking the belt to OKC. Out to the woodshed went the Thunder thanks to the Memphis Grizzlies because of Ja Morant. Now, did Ja really figure out OKC? I'll leave that up to you. Let me know in the comments if you agree with Ja's assessment that he said in the press conference, postseason or end of season media availability. He said he had the Thunder figured out. Is that the case? I don't know. But I know in that first half, he was the best player on the court against the Oklahoma City Thunder until Lou Dort accidentally slipped, undercut, however you want to phrase it. Until Ja went out of that game, Memphis had the capacity to make that a much more competitive series than it was. I don't think Memphis beats OKC. I don't think they get swept. Ja has that capacity. He has to stay on the floor. He has to stay focused. Clearly, Nike still sees it. Do you still see Ja as a potential future face of the NBA, at least from an American perspective? Hit me up on X. Let me know in the comments at Joe Mullinax on X. When we come back here on Locked On Grizzlies, we're going to close out this episode of the show talking about Gigi Jackson, podcast appearances, and pigeons. Stick around here on Locked On Grizzlies. Welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies. I am your host for this episode, Joe Mullinax, flying solo. No DeMichael Cole, Memphis Grizzlies beat writer for the Commercial Appeal. I promise we will be back together later this week. The dynamic duo will ride once more. Life happens. We both have had a lot going on this last week. Not that you care, understandable on that front. Just giving you some feedback. We will be back together soon. Closing out today's show, Gigi Jackson was on the FanDuel, I think it's Run It Back show, with Michelle Beadle and Chandler Parsons, those guys. And I get it. All right. I want to stress this, that I understand why Gigi and other Grizzlies players are doing this show. Obviously, the Grizzlies play on FanDuel Sportsnet. There's probably some sort of contractual obligation that they have to have some of these players on. You'll notice that it's oftentimes younger players that are not in the same boat as Ja and Jaren and Desmond Bane. But Gigi Jackson being someone that goes out on this show, and he says, and this is from Run It Back FDTV, the Grizzlies called players that they target on defense pigeons. Remember, if you remember correctly, Ja may have talked about targeting a pigeon in a game-winning shot. And their goal is to go after guys like Nikola Jokic, Steph Curry, and Isaiah Joe. All right. And Gigi Jackson says this on the Run It Back show. Now, if you're not a Grizztorian, if you're not familiar with with Chandler Parsons and his history with Memphis, he obviously is not someone that Memphians hold in high regard, right? His time in Memphis was flawed at best, a disaster in reality. The contract signing completely doomed the Grizzlies and essentially was one of the reasons that the grit and grind era ended the way that it did. They made a bet on Chandler Parsons. I want to stress I would have made the same bet on Chandler Parsons. I wrote a piece at the time that said Chandler Parsons and the Memphis Grizzlies is a marriage that needs to happen, a marriage waiting in heaven. And it was actually waiting in hell to be burned to a fiery crisp. That's the way it ends. So the fact that any Grizzly is talking to Chandler Parsons the way that he's talked about Memphis in the past, I'm not a fan of, okay? But where I really struggle in this particular instance is a young player like Gigi Jackson, who still has all the potential in the world. I always point out when I talk about Gigi, because people will get the comments and they'll yell at me on social media. I would have had Gigi be the sixth man if he hadn't gotten injured. And I still believed in Gigi, as did DeMichael Cole, as did Taylor Jenkins and Zach Kleiman. One of the reasons Memphis didn't make the moves that they made is they thought that Vince Williams Jr. and Gigi Jackson would bounce back from their injuries better than they did. And we were all wrong. We were wrong. I still think Gigi has tremendous potential. But Gigi was not good this season. And the fact that he's calling anybody a pigeon in terms of targeting them defensively, when he was a plus 9.8 in points per 100 possessions defensively. What does that mean according to Cleaning the Glass? That means that opposing offenses scored almost 10 more points per 100 possessions played when Gigi Jackson was on the court for the Memphis Grizzlies as opposed to off of it. That is in the first percentile in the entire NBA. And you might be sitting there thinking or driving, however you're taking in this show, and first percentile, number one, that's not bad, Joe. No, it's the opposite direction when it comes to percentiles. Sorry to yell at you, dear listener, dear viewer, but I am frustrated with the young Gigi Jackson because he was arguably, depending on how you interpret statistics, the worst or one of the worst defenders in the entire National Basketball Association. And if you don't believe the stats, your eyes tell you. If you watch the team play, it wasn't just his allowing of people to score. It was also the simple fact that he did not put up the numbers when it came to winning the way that the Memphis Grizzlies needed him to do so. And I was crushed on social media. I was destroyed for saying that G.G. Jackson was putting up numbers on a bad basketball team. In fairness, partially because of the way I said it. I think he called him a garbage scorer, and people thought that I meant that as he was not good. I meant like he was putting up great stats on a bad basketball team. And we've talked about this here on Locked On Grizzlies before, going all the way back to Dillon Brooks and what he was asked to be as a rookie and how that perspective changed the Dillon Brooks experience in Memphis. He saw himself as a core cog in the Grizzlies machine because of all that he was asked to do as a second-round draft pick rookie on a bad team in his first year in the National Basketball Association. Does that sound familiar? It should, because that's exactly what happened to G.G. Jackson. The Grizzlies were a bad basketball team in 2023-2024, and G.G. took advantage and put up numbers. And anytime the best since LeBron at this age, the best since Kobe at this age, when you're putting up numbers like that and you read, because these people, these young people, these young, talented players, young people in general, are so online, they're reading these headlines and they're hearing how great they are. And context is difficult. It's difficult for people my age that are almost 40, much less a young adult who reclassified and would have been a freshman in college. There are levels to competing at the NBA level. And obviously, in the case of G.G., the added context of the foot injury, a really tough year for him. Doesn't mean you give up on him. Doesn't mean you say he's not going to be a good NBA player. I still think he will be. But it does mean you don't go on a podcast or a television show, a streaming service, run it back, and talk about the Grizzlies calling out pigeons. G.G., you were the biggest pigeon in the NBA, or at least one of them. And that doesn't mean it can't change. Of course it can. With health and reps and development, G.G. at 6'9" has all the tools to be a good defender. We've seen flashes of that because he was given those opportunities. But there's a time and place in this life, and that was not the time or place to talk about how you targeted other bad defenders. Because if that terminology was similar across the league, guess who would have been the pigeon when it came to the Memphis Grizzlies last season? It would have been G.G. Jackson. And at times it was. G.G. was lost. He wasn't able to complete plays. He wasn't able to finish rotations. He was asked to be something more than he was ready to be. And that's one of the reasons that Taylor Jenkins is no longer with the Memphis Grizzlies organization. Will G.G. thrive under Tuomas Isalo? I'm sure that's something that we'll talk a lot about over this summer. But G.G. has a lot of work to do, just like the rest of the Grizzlies organization, from Zach Kleiman, the GM, all the way down to the players. Everyone has work to do this summer. Less talking to Chandler Parsons, more focus on play. And again, Gigi's been in the gym, all sorts of Instagram videos. It has to be applied in actual basketball. Summer League's coming up, but even with Summer League, we still have several months. What does G.G. look like in October and November? If he's still a member of the Memphis Grizzlies, that's what I care most about. Hit me up on X at Joe Mullinax. Let me know in the comments. Are you concerned about G.G. talking about pigeons on Run It Back? Do you care? Let me know. Always open to feedback there in the comments, especially on YouTube, but anywhere. Social media, everywhere you can make a comment, let me know. Thank you so much for being with us on this episode of Locked On Grizzlies. We'll continue to grind through maybe a little bit of a playoff preview. We'll start taking a closer look at the rotations and the bench of the Grizzlies. I know DeMichael recently talked about assistant coaches he'd like to see brought in, working with Tuomas Isalo. There's all sorts of angles we can take with the team. Looking at the Final Four of the NBA, there's so much work that these Grizzlies have to do to try to catch up. We can take deeper dives into that as well, to be sure. Thank you so much for making Locked On Grizzlies your first listen today. For your second listen, check out the Locked On NBA Big Board Show. NBA draft expert Rafael Barlow reacts to every workout, interview, and rumor leading up to the NBA draft. Find Locked On NBA Big Board on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. Make sure you're liking, commenting, rating, reviewing, subscribing wherever you get Locked On Grizzlies, on Apple, Spotify, Amazon, YouTube, Google, literally anywhere you get a podcast, you can get us, because we are proud members of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team each and every single day. And that means that we are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. Make sure you're becoming an everydayer if you are not already one. And if you are already one, thank you so much. And make sure you're back with us tomorrow here on Locked On Grizzlies. The offseason continues, and you're in the right place for Grizzlies talk. See you tomorrow here on Locked On Grizzlies.